Hello and welcome to AI Fund's Launcher Series. I'm Kimberly Rose, the VP of Marketing for the Venture Studio. Today, I'm talking with Dhaval Chadha, who is a serial entrepreneur. He has co-founded and led 3 companies, a startup, an early stage fund, and a consulting firm, and his most recent startup was just acquired. He has led innovation and strategy consulting engagements with Fortune 100 companies, including Dell, Coca-Cola, and Whirlpool, and managed an early stage investment fund. Today, we're going to talk about the challenges of running a company and the importance of putting your oxygen mask on first. Dhaval will give helpful tips to what he has learned along the way to protect his own mental health. Welcome, Dhaval.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So just in looking in the background of just, what founders go through and just my own experience of working with founders, and then coming across this TechCrunch article, which was a pretty alarming statistics about that founders are 2 times more likely to suffer from depression, 6 times more likely to suffer from ADHD, 3 times to suffer from substance abuse, and on and on and on from suicidal thoughts. I was quite taken back by that. What's your take on that?
So clearly I think that's a massive problem, and it's been happening for a while now, and I'm glad to see that those types of stats are coming into more visibility, and that people are more clear on what the founder journey actually looks like. But I'm one of the people that believes that it shouldn't be or needn't be that way, and that there's certain things that push founders into situations that lead to those types of outcomes that are completely avoidable. And based on my personal experience, I can say I think that they come down to ultimately to two main concepts that I think are really important to understand. The first one is that more hours worked is not necessarily more work produced, right? So the fact that you're putting in more time can often mean that you're neglecting to take care of yourself and to exercise and to meditate or spend time with your family or whatever it is that recharges you, and get enough sleep. Actually, that should be top of the list. And so what that means is that founders will often push themselves into working too much, not doing the things that recharge the batteries. And so your chance of burning out or of producing a lot less in the hours that you are putting in is that much higher. And so I actually think it's counterproductive to put in hours beyond a certain point, maybe 5 hours extra a week, maybe 10 hours extra a week compared to a person who's on a salary job is okay. But beyond that, you actually start to see not just diminishing returns on the extra hours, but diminishing returns overall. And I think the reason why this is often the case that founders kind of do this is because, one, there's a cultural meme around, like, the more you work, the better founder you are, or the more committed you are, or the better you're doing by yourself and by investors. And I just think that ultimately that's not true, because if you're producing less and you're less happy, you're a poorer leader and all of the downside, or if you burn out, God forbid, then you're definitely not doing right by yourself and by investors. And a related idea is this idea that one of my investors from my last company very, very kind of wisely pointed out to me, but it took me hindsight bias to understand what he really meant by it, which was that ultimately this whole thing of like creating companies and products and trying to sell them and all of that, the main reason why we're doing this is because we're looking for love. And what he meant by that is that we're doing that to get someone or the other's appreciation and approval. It could be ourselves, it could be our family, it could be someone that bullied us when we were young, it could be a startup community that we want to be a part of, or a millionaires club that we want to be a part of, or whatever it is. And that success is just a poor proxy for the approval, which is just a poor proxy for the love of that individual or that group of people. And once we realize that the people that matter are going to love us independent of our failure or success, it takes a bit of the pressure off, and you can engage in entrepreneurship for what it's truly about. And what it's truly about, in my opinion, today, is it's truly about service and about learning about yourself.
So when you first became a founder, obviously you weren't on this path. What,
No.
so when you first started, what did your life look like? And when did you make this change?
Yeah. So when I first started, for sure, a lot of these pressures, both to kind of be someone or be successful, and my definition was perhaps a little bit different than the standard one. I was going after impact entrepreneurship from the get go, but that didn't that came with its own set of similar pitfalls around seeking approval and appreciation and all of that, uh, and and so it led to me not doing the things that I think are fundamental to staying healthy and to staying balanced, and to actually being a better entrepreneur and a better leader. So I was working way too much, and drinking way too much. That was the way of unwinding, right? And it was just, I was a ball of nerves, and I, during my last startup journey, had a burnout event, and was completely kind of out of commission for a couple of months before finding my way back into it, and managing to turn things around and get the exit that we got. But yeah, it was a very, very challenging experience, to say the least.
Now, you had mentioned earlier something about you had worked with a coach. So
Yeah.
when did you seek out a coach, and what was that, working with that coach, what was that like? What type of recommendations would you make to your fellow founders in looking at coaches or other
Yeah,
ideas to help them on this journey?
for sure. So I started to look for a coach when it was clear that I was in over my head and I needed support to work through the challenges I was facing, which was probably too late. I should have probably done that sooner. And the coach I worked with is trained in a program called New Ventures West, which is a organization from San Francisco, and she was great. She was really, really supportive and helpful. It's a deep topic that I can go into a lot, because I ended up doing the certification myself the following year. But I think the point about having a coach is that you have a safe space to offload a lot of what's going on. And in this particular approach to coaching, it's called developmental coaching. They're helping you not just problem solve, which is useful, but if it's just that, then you constantly depend on someone else to help you problem solve. But they're focusing on developing certain types of capacities, right, which makes those problems no longer be problems in the future. And the approach is that you, in addition to the conversations, you do a lot of practices, and you build up skills by training yourself in certain skill sets, be those trust or confidence or whatever it is, or better conversation or listening, and so on and so forth, right? So for me, it was really, really powerful, because the coaching came together with a set of practices, and the overall system together became something that I continue to do till today, and I call it my set of non-negotiable practices, and they take precedence over work. So on a daily basis, there's at least 2 hours that'll go into things that I do that are all about kind of self-care or time with people, and I will make sure I will do this every single day, and that work comes second after those, at least 2 hours of those things.
Right. So what would the recommendations you would give to other founders to basically let them know it's okay to get help? Because so many, are very stoked of, they have to work these, crazy 80, 90-hour work weeks, and they're going to do it for 5 years. And this is the way it is just when starting a company. What's your recommendation on kind of breaking through to let them know it's okay? It's okay, not number one, to get help, because a lot of people, I would think, that would be scared to admit that they need help.
Yeah. So a couple thoughts on that, right? The first one is that there's a saying, I think it's in Zen Buddhism, that if you can't find 5 minutes to meditate a day, you need to meditate for 10. So the founders that are working 70, 80, 90 hours a week are the ones, in my estimation, are the ones that need it the most. One, because they're stretching themselves too thin already, and they're probably close to edge because of that extra stress. And then the second reason is because they believe they need to do that, right? We have a great example. I forget his last name, but Toby from Shopify, who has said that he's never left the office after 5 p.m. And Shopify, I don't need to tell people listening to this podcast how successful that company's been. So I think this meme around like founders need to burn themselves to the ground to make their company successful has to go and be replaced much more by doing a high stress job like being a founder, where many salaries and so on depend on you and so on. Is all the more reason why getting outside support is fundamental to doing your job well. More than putting in the extra hours is getting support, especially when you really need it. Not everyone needs it, not all of the time. I fully agree with that. But then there are situations in which you're struggling to stay happy or stay balanced, and most people know what that feels like. And so if you're going through a situation like that, I think it's important that you seek out support. And I often find, in my personal experience, and I think everyone's different, coaching was far more powerful than therapy. But then I think everyone has their own specific experience, and you should do what works best for you.
So what does your day-to-day schedule look like now that you've incorporated?
Okay, cool. So every morning starts with a morning routine, which includes meditation, the Wim Hof method. It includes exercise or yoga when I'm not injured, which I am right now. But otherwise, either on average, I would say like 3 to 4 days of like working out and 2 days of yoga per week. And then my work day, and then important parts of that are eating really healthy as well, right? For me, that means as much plant-based as possible. I do still eat seafood, but I found that, and I'm happy to point people towards the doctors that I think are at the cutting edge of nutrition today that point towards this type of eating, and grain-free as much as possible, low carb as much as possible, and so on. And then when I'm back home, probably unwind. Often, like, I produce music. That's something that brings me a lot of joy, so I try to do that at least for half an hour every day. Speak to my parents back in India once once every 2 days, dad probably once every week.
Mm-hmm.
That's a crucial part. Hang out with friends, and then of course like a nighttime routine, which is really, really important. No screens after 10 o'clock, and I go to bed usually at like 11, so about an hour of like no screens. Read every night, warm shower before bed, and then try to get this consistent amount, 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep, starting at the same time, ending at the same time. Again, like, I'm far from perfect on all of the things that I've said, but I think I get to like 80% or 90% on a weekly average of things that I just described, and that keeps me sane and productive, and allows me to produce a lot more per unit time than I've ever done before in my life.
That's fantastic. I think I need to start following your schedule. I think I'm on my computer up until almost the minute before I go to sleep, which is not a good thing.
Yeah. Have you watched Matthew Walker's videos or read his book?
No.
I forget exactly what it's called, maybe Why We Sleep. He's on Joe Rogan as well. He's done a few podcasts here and there. He's the world's #1 expert, I would say, on, or at least the #1 most vocal expert on sleep. And the evidence is just phenomenal on how it's important and how you make sure you get enough and high quality sleep. And the way that I've learned to think about it is that if you're not sleeping enough, or if you're sleeping poorly, you're basically borrowing time from the future, and that bill adds up, and it has compound interest, and at some point you're going to have to pay it down with reduced lifespan, essentially, right? Or health problems when you're older. So coffee, screens before bed, all of these things, you're basically borrowing from the future.
Right. Definitely agree with that. So has any of your routines changed since the pandemic?
Well, more because of the injury. I had a slip disc recently in my back, so that's impacted it more than the pandemic. Because normally, like in this situation, I'm able to substitute working out outside or at the gym with doing that at home, but it's been more challenging with the injury. But other than that, not really. No, I wouldn't say so.
It was interesting. I came across a VC that was working with their startup founders, and they were very much into the mental health, the well-being for their founders. where they were given a certain percentage of what they were funding, but it had to be applied to mental health programs. Have you seen any of this, or what's been your take with VCs that you've dealt with?
Yeah, right on. So I hadn't seen that specific initiative until you pointed it out. What I have seen is VCs offering coaching to founders, and often that means paying for external coaching so that like you have a degree of separation and kind of the whole confidentiality stuff squared away. And I even know some friends who are trying to raise a fund where one of them is a founder and kind of executive coach, and the other one has a background in VC. And I think that's going to become a lot more common, where like VCs just take it's not that much money, right? And if you're guaranteeing that your portfolio companies are being managed by people who are healthy and growing and developing as individuals and leaders, then that seems like a no-brainer.
Definitely is important. Well, is there anything that I have missed that you still want to talk about, and what you've learned? And again, to our founder community, giving those helpful tips. Anything that I haven't covered?
So I think that the most important thing I can probably say is that whatever you're working on, it's just a product, it's just a company. You'll probably do many of these in your life. So take it a little bit lightly. Stay focused on what really matters in life, and what really matters on this journey as well. And that's not necessarily the numbers in your exit. And yes, how you, what you learn through the experience, how you treat people, and perhaps those are the two most important things that you're doing, right? Your investors will, some will make money, some will lose money, and they're fully aware of the game, and for them it's often a statistical approach, right? And so do your best, but without killing yourself.
Well, fantastic advice. This has been great. I thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to sharing our interview with the founder community. A lot of valuable tips.
Thanks for having me. I hope it was useful.